Welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast number 42.1 for Gary Mary. A little bit of news before we get started. I just spoke for DHS last week. Next week is ISSE, which is part of EMA.org, think tank in Europe. I'll be speaking on their think tank. Other than that, not a whole lot of earth-shattering news. So we have a special guest today, Gary, who we've crossed paths in the past, maybe not at the same time, but similar places and similar people. Has a really interesting background. So Gary, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background? And it's great to have you, by the way.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, my name's Gary Mary. I've had an amazing journey in technology. I started out on a farm in Missouri, read a bunch of Jack London books and all of that, and joined the Marine Corps. And, after the Marine Corps, decided that it's time to go to college, and I've been in technology ever since. And really, if anything, cybersecurity has been the culmination of everything before it. And so even getting here, running a cybersecurity company, and actually my third cybersecurity company, it's all built on what I did, before this. I was a coder, I was a C guy, then later begrudgingly C++, never could manage it, but I coded in it. So yeah, it's been a great journey. I've done some really amazing things, and some of the stuff I want to talk about today, some of the things you hear about, and why don't we, why don't they, why can't they, why isn't the CIO in the boardroom, why isn't, why aren't they listening to me? I got the volume all the way to 11. No one's listening to me. Why aren't they listening to me? And I've done all of that. I've turned the volume all the way up. I've been in boardrooms. I've been ignored, and I've been listened to. So, running across you, Chris Roberts, Kim, and, if anything, I'm a collector. I'm a collector of ideas. I'm a collector of thinkers. And every once in a while, I'll find a thinker like yourself, Kim, Chris Roberts, and I kind of, latch onto them. And there's so much redundancy today. People are saying the same things over and over and over. And when you can find somebody who's, kind of thinking well, and not just repeating, and not just this cookie cutter thing, you kind of try to get close and see what they're up to. So that's how you and I kind of got together. I saw something that you had done. I'd seen a couple of your podcasts, and I was like, listen, I want to pay attention to this guy. I want to know what Haunted Hacker is all about. And so, even though I've been kind of lurking out in Discord for a while, but getting a chance to meet you, Kim, is awesome. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. There's those of us who don't speak or don't actually drink like the Kool-Aid and the buzzwords, and it comes with its blessings and its curses, right? So
yeah,
if you don't think the same as everybody else, then you tend to stick out a little bit more and become a target. But you also, people remember what you say, and people listen to what you say because it's not blended into the noise.
Yeah. Innovators are almost always criticized. And in today, you think that we could grow beyond that, especially in cybersecurity, where lessons need to be learned, right? I mean, one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest challenges we have, guys, is that we're not able to learn from everybody else's mistakes. So it's like somebody invented the wheel, but we don't know about it because they can't talk about it. They won't talk about it. The reason they won't talk about it is because they can't. It's not that easy. So they do the turtle defense. They pull in their arms and legs and shut up their shell, and nobody learns from them. And so, in fact, I was watching a survey that Chris Roberts had done, and somebody had said something negative, like, why do people respond to these? And I was thinking to myself, why do I follow them? Why do I take time out of my day to do that? Is because, like I said, I'm a guy who collects and learns. And there were, out of that one little conversation, I ended up with, a new Discord server that I was a member of, and like 3 new connections. And so, yeah, unless you're listening, you won't learn. And if you're just speaking the gospel as you've heard it, you're not gonna move us forward. You're not gonna move cybersecurity forward. Cybersecurity needs unique thinkers, and it needs people who who aren't afraid and who aren't afraid to participate and talk. I mean, I love your magazine and the Haunted Hacker brand. Shedding some light on other people's mistakes is a big deal. Like I said, if you can't learn, from other people's mistakes. I was reading the RSA breach just, I don't know, a couple of months ago about the RSA breach. And it was such a closed box. I didn't know all the stuff that went on. I don't remember who wrote it, who wrote the article. Maybe it was Dark Reading or something like that. But oh my God, did you read that? Did you read that whole account of that? Well, you probably already knew all of it, but the rest of us didn't. It was fascinating.
It's the same like the pipeline, colonial pipeline. What we heard on the news was not totally the true story, like the full story. And there's a lot of things that people don't understand about the economy and the dichotomy of ransomware and that whole environment. So we hear like top level stuff, but you don't really hear like the meat of the problems unless you go out and search for it and listen to people, even though, some of their ideas may be against the grain, but there's always something good to pull away. And that's the way I look at it. So me and Chris have been friends for a very long time. And he's one of those guys that he's going to speak his mind and not somebody else's. And that's what I appreciate about him. And that's the way I try to carry myself is I listen to what everybody has to say because there's always a jewel hidden somewhere in what they're saying. And I take what I can, I leave the rest. But I don't criticize. I don't criticize people participating and getting out there and putting information out there. I know there's a bad habit in cybersecurity where people will make a post based on their experience or what they know. And there's always that one person who comes in and tries to tear them down. And I'm just like, instead of going out there and smashing all these people, why don't you yourself take some time and put yourself out there and see what it's like to share and get that feedback.
Or ask a question. I love asking questions. I mean,
and failing's part of it. I think that a lot of people haven't had that experience because they're not brave enough to take that risk. I failed many times. I was a CISO for a company in Scotland, and literally they brought me in as a CISO so that they could get into a couple of the financial magazines. And then after that, I never got paid. So it's one of those risks that you take, and you don't really expect that outcome. But I'm smarter for having gone through that. And I think in cybersecurity, we fail quite a bit. But things have become stagnant because if you look at the defense platforms, not much has changed over the past 20 years. They're a little bit advanced algorithms, a little bit, more bells and whistles, but it's still that reactive, semi-proactive look. I think it got stale after IPS. And it's because we don't have people who are willing to take that risk and innovate something that is completely different. I haven't seen that a lot.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. I mean, taking the risk, putting yourself out there is part of that, and listening to other people's mistakes and other people's I love hearing what somebody else has done wrong, even though I know I've done just as many because we're all humans and we all have X amount of mistakes we're going to make in our lives, no matter what, where, or who you are. And learning and trying to not make the same mistakes. That's the thing that's amazing to me in cybersecurity. You have to read an article that's 4 months old of an event and you're thinking, well, do we do that? And you find out you do that. And you're like, we've been doing it longer than they did. And it just didn't happen to us. So I think these kind of podcasts, these kind of dialogues, are super important. And, when somebody hands you the microphone, it's important that you take that opportunity to say things like what we're talking about. Look, sure, I've done this and I've done that, but I've also screwed up a time or two, and this is how I did it. And these other times kind of worked okay. But I think as technologists, I think we're typically kind of critical of ourselves and of everything, and it's hard to break that mold. It's hard not to think, oh man, come on, it can't be that easy or it can't be that bad. But it's just a battle. It's a constant battle, even for me. And like I said, I'm I'm a collector of ideas and people with unique thoughts. And, you know, like you said, not much has changed. And so when you hear somebody see something a little bit different, you kind of perk up. You're like, well, wow. And I can tell you, I was a CIO. And I remember we spent all this money. I can't tell you how many millions and millions of dollars on technology I spent. And every time we we saved the company, which we saved the company multiple times, just because somebody would walk up to me and say, hey, did you know we do this? Or did, this buddy of mine heard? And you're like, really? And then you get your CISO and you're like, hey, do we do this? And they're like, I doubt it. And like, well, prove it to me. And, that human intelligence and that human intelligence, what do you call it?
Human, yeah.
Human is paramount.
Mm.
I was at a conference in New York. Man, this is good. The good news is that the company's not around anymore. But I was at a conference. This guy says to me, he says, he's kind of giggling. He says, I heard you lost your keys. And I was like, I'm not thinking a couple drinks in. I'm thinking, what's he talking about? I thought he picked up my hotel room key on the ground or something.
Mm.
And he says, no, I heard you lost your encryption keys. And I was like, bullshit. That didn't happen to me. You don't lose keys. You don't carry them in your pockets. You don't just leave them on your counter or forget where you left them or whatever. I called my CISO. I was like, hey, this person is telling me this. And they're like, nah, it's bullshit. There's no way that happened. So I go back and I call this guy up on it. And I call his bluff. I say, look, it's not cool. It's not funny. It's not anything, man. He goes, no, I know I was kind of laughing, but I thought you knew it. Short story long, we had an intern who was going to write a paper, and the paper was how much stuff could he take from a company as an intern and get away with it. And he was going to write a paper about this. And so the way we found out about it was the guy who told me this, I don't want to mention too many names, said, well, your guy from POS support, and he said his first name. Let's just pretend it was Steve. Oh. He said, Steve. So I called back, and they're like, I called my head of POS, and he says, we don't have anybody named Steve. Get a hold of HR. We look around. Come to find out, we find this kid, get him in a conference room. And he's like, yeah, that's what I did. I did. I called the POS provider and they gave me the encryption keys. They gave them to me. And all I did was, because my caller ID was equal to my company, they said, oh, since his caller ID was from the company, they thought he worked in POS support. He took our keys.
Oh.
Yeah, we had to call the FBI because there was a couple other people involved. And point being, is that I would not have known any of that unless somebody had said something to me. And it's the technology, you got to have it. It's foundational, but your ears and your eyes are your best asset, even in cybersecurity.
Yep, absolutely. And getting to know your employees as people and not just as employees is another good point. I preach that all the time when I give talks, and people say, what's one thing that you would change in 2021? And then I'll get the next question, the same question next year. What would you change in the industry in 2022? And it's always the same. I would tell people to look at their employees as people and not as numbers or just employees, because they can be your biggest asset if you have a good relationship, or they can be your worst nightmare if you don't have a good relationship.
Yep.
And I think we've gotten away from the human factor. We've gotten away from human touch and that relationship in the workplace, because not only do we work from home, but all the technology that we put in between us. And I think that in order to be successful as an industry, we're going to have to get back to, the bare knuckles. We're going to have to look at people and relationships and realize how important they are, and foster them more, and build a culture. That's one thing that I seem to not be able to find in a lot of companies nowadays is culture. I remember back in the day, you worked for, I guess, what used to be Saint Corporation.
It's still Saint Corporation. It's still alive.
Okay. So they had like a really unique culture back in the day. I had been using Saint since it was Satan and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
Billy Austin was a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I saw that culture that they bred there in Maryland, and just within the group itself. And that's kind of what I look for. So like in my company now, I have Luke Pyro McComey that pulled me into his group at Blue Bastion. And it's a great culture. We have some of the best hackers in the industry that work on the red team, but it's not the work and it's not building of the teams. It's the relationships, and everybody there is friends from some other place, whether it be another company, whether it be the industry itself. But we were friends before we were coworkers, and I think that helps a lot as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you get in a hurry. You only got so many hours in your day. The bigger your job is, the less hours you have, the less in control you are, and you forget, about that part. And now, now we have, and so you think, well, the technology is going to make my decisions for me now. And I'm a guy that's currently playing in the AI arena. And now we think AI is maybe the answer, this sort of pseudo human thing. So maybe that's going to put even more distance, which just is the snake eating its own tail. You think, well, here we are, if your employees aren't part of the solution, they're the problem. They are the problem. And as you said, the culture is the problem. And you're talking about Saint, there's a guy there named Sam Klein. And he's been there forever. And, that culture is just sort of revolves around him and his unbelievably deep knowledge of vulnerability management and technology and things like that. I love that guy. All the companies I've worked for, I've always meet these people like the Sam Kleins that are, I'm just always amazed at their clarity. And it just doesn't seem to, we just can't seem to commoditize that. We can't seem to teach it. We can't seem to inherit it. I mean, I was working with a company. We took from just a small regional little retailer to a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse, and we sold it to another company. And in less than a year, it was gone. In 2 years, they were delisted. Both companies just dissolved. I mean, they still have some retail outlets, but in the end, they just absolutely crushed and collapsed into the ground. It was culture, 100% culture versus culture. When those two didn't come together, all was lost. All was lost from day one.
Yeah, that's one thing interesting. We worked at another place, a mutual place, Bank of America.
Yeah,
and that culture was very unique. I'm actually still close friends with a lot of people who still work there, and I found that culture to be really like cohesive and dynamic and flexible, and it really paved a way into what is now my career. But I mean, those people there, like Dan and Tilly and some of those guys, they built those teams around people, not roles. And I think that is the key to a lot of good decision making is, yeah, you may have roles and requirements, but why not identify the people that you've seen or that you've spent time with or that you've worked with and build a role around that person? Because you already know that person inside and out, and they can create that role. And the best jobs I've ever had is when people come to me and say, hey, Mike, we want you on our team. Here's a piece of paper, write down your role. And so I'd write my role and that would be my job. And it's probably the best jobs I've ever had is when my personality and challenges and skills can dictate what that role is.
Yeah. I, one of the challenges of being a CEO is that you think, well, I got to put my culture. It's got to be part of my culture. It's me. And it's one of the things about being a modern CEO. It's so cool. It's so much better, I think, than it used to be. In that you get the flexibility to not necessarily. You can absorb the Sam Klein or the Roberts or anybody like that's culture and build off of it. It used to be, it had to be, if you were the CEO, it was your culture. You talk about Bank of America, we had Hugh McCall because I was on the Nation's Bank side. and talking about a character and talking about a culture and really smash mouth banking. But it was a very close, tight knit organization, and I think it probably still is today. I still have a lot of friends from there, but I don't know how many people. I don't really know anybody who's still part of that team. Banking is a roller coaster ride, man. You got to hold on, and tighten up.
And the threats and the emergencies we used to have is crazy. I actually followed one of my mentors at Bank of America on to two different companies. Dennis Schmidt, he was in technology, and I ended up following him to ShoreTel and became their director of security over there. But yeah, it's those relationships, I think, that really have furthered my career more than anything. Being able to work with people that I care for, but I think there's a lot more problems in the industry other than just not recognizing people for people. I think it's the whole culture of we have this unidentified skills gap, and I've yet to see this gap in real life. Like I know that they say it exists, but I don't think we have a skills gap. I think we have a hiring gap. I think the way that we put roles out there and requirements, we're requiring these kids to have all these certifications for an entry-level job. What kid has $5,000 to drop for a certification? We're asking way too much. And then when I see some of these mid-level jobs, it kind of cracks me up because, they'll start out with, okay, let's say, take my role, for example, and this wasn't the way it was, but MDR manager, right? And then when you look at the requirements, they would have like a literal block of requirements of, oh, you have to know C++, you have to know this, you have to know that.
Yeah.
They expect you to know all these things, but pay you for about that much. And I think that's the biggest failure in the industry right now, is be able to look at how we hire, look at the supposed gap and skills gap and open jobs that we can't fill, and figure out why. It's not because there's not enough people out there. It's because of what we're requesting of those people, I think.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Behind every one of those recs, behind every one of those requirements, there's somebody in technology that's writing that, right? HR didn't write those things. So I don't know I don't know why that's so prevalent. I'll tell you, I'm a huge fan of the, the folks that go to the technical colleges and things like that. And I do quite a bit of mentorship around community colleges, and they've got amazing technology, and usually the adjunct professors who are teaching there are no fooling, technologists that are doing some good work. But I think that maybe in corporate America, that's not changing as much as we want. But I guarantee you, in the startups, and where people are starting to, like my guys I have now, or even back in Saint or before that, when I had started a company that I later sold called Deep Run. I didn't care. I care less what school you went to. All I wanted to know was, what kind of a person were you? Can you come in and be part of the culture? Because you can't pretend to be part of the culture if it's not who you are.
Right.
It's better for you to say, no, I don't. It's probably not the job for me because I don't really like this and that. But other than that, the skill set is really in the deliverables. Can they deliver? And using your imagination. I mean, the biggest asset you have in cybersecurity today is imagination. And you can teach yourself Python. You can teach yourself Kali, even I have a box with Kali on it. I mean, come on, it's easy enough to get some of those skill sets and be able to talk about them. But does that mean you can do anything with it? Can you go out and do a pen test? Can you go out and do, some of the things that you're doing on the red team side? No.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too. The people coming into the industry, I've seen some really creative people, and the best people I've seen so far are not really the ones who have the cybersecurity degrees or all the certifications. They're the people coming from other industries and other career fields. They bring a fresh mindset, and those end up being pretty strong leaders, because we've fallen into a bad habit of following previous leadership, that's followed previous leadership way back to the dawn of cybersecurity, back before we even had InfoSec. And back then it was a different culture. Everybody held tight to information. It was not a sharing type environment. And now we want people to be, creative and collaborative and unified. But the problem is a lot of the old leadership still believes in that very close-knit, keep everything close to you type of situation.
Yep. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to open up and say what you didn't do right. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, I'm supposed to, at this point in my career, I'm supposed to have everything figured out. And I'm supposed to be able to have all the answers. But it's one of those things that the loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room today. Person.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me about your biggest win as an executive throughout any role, whether it be, CTO, CIO, CEO, whatever.
Heck yeah. So, so I got hired for working for a retailer, and a guy named Bob Wildrick is probably not someone you probably don't know about, but he's probably one of the top retailers in the history of retail, maybe the top 3. So he puts together this team, and the team included myself. And we were going to take this small regional retailer, which I love retail. I mean, really all business is retail. Everything's retail, good side, bad side, it's all retail. He puts together this team, and we get together, we don't know each other. We don't know whether we even really like each other, any of us. There's 4 of us. I got the technology, you got the CFO, you got the marketing guy, you got the sales guy, and the sourcing guy, and all this, the stores guy. And we go through a 3-day event, and we're trying to figure out what our values are and what the corporate, the different mottos are, different things like that. And Bob wasn't there. He comes in at the end of the event, and he says, what do you guys have? And we had our flip charts, and we showed him what he has. He's like, listen, that's all bullshit. He goes, you guys are idiots. He goes, listen, there's 2 things we're going to focus on. He goes, one is our culture of winning. And the other is, we're going to make this company a $1 billion company. And I remember sitting there thinking, this man is insane, because I had already started working there. I was a couple of months into it. Well, we didn't have any money. And in fact, our whole network, you're going to love this. Our whole network was token ring running with passive mouse, but it was all done through the RJ11s. So you would have, I didn't even know it would work. So you would have the back of your PC, you would have a little hairball of wires coming off of your drop cord, and you'd have the 4 wires plugged into the RJ45. And then on the phone side, they used the phone, the back end. They were using the RJ11s. So I'm sitting there, he's telling us we're going to make this as a $1 billion company. I needed a server. We didn't have enough money, so I would buy, like, 1 month I would buy a hard drive. The next month I would buy a case. The next month I'd buy a motherboard, et cetera, et cetera. He says, my point is that I at that point I didn't know what it really took to be successful as a businessman. And I knew I loved being a CIO. I knew I liked retail, but that optimism and that hope, and not more than hope, it's like you commit to something and you believe in something. And I believe this, Mike, I think that one of the reasons CIOs have such a hard time in the boardroom is because we're so intensely critical of because we have to, it's our nature to be critical, because it seems like everything's out to get you. But when you get into that boardroom, which I was blessed enough to finally get a chance to do with the same company, companies don't run off of criticality. They run off of hope. They run off of, look, we're going to be a $1 billion company. I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to get a couple $100 to buy some memory for a server, and he's telling me we're going to make this a $1 billion company. I get an opportunity. This is a little bit of a long story. I hope it doesn't bore you. So I get an opportunity. Suddenly I'm the CIO. This guy's all over the place. He's, we're going to make a $1 billion company out of it. Probably should have been in chapter 11 at that point. And next thing you know, I'm in the boardroom. I'm the CIO, and I'm thinking, this is exactly what I always thought should happen. every board should have a CIO. And you hear this all the time, right? You know, you got to bring the CIO into the boardroom. So here I am. I am today living proof that it works. However, it's not as easy as you think. You don't walk in and the board's saying to you like, oh gosh, with open arms, look, tell us what we need to do. And I remember before the meeting, the chairman I always got the last slide of the deck, and the chairman before the board meeting, he'd walk up and say, "Are we secure?" And you know what the answer is. I mean, are we secure? Right. No, we're not secure. We're burning down right now. We saved the world last night. Like, I should have a big S on my chest. And I'm like, oh yeah, we're definitely, you know, trying hard to be secure, because that's not what I want to hear. And so I would, you know, give my one slide, and, you know, he'd be back there going like this because everyone wanted to catch their flights. And anyhow, this all builds to what I think was my single biggest accomplishment, which was when I would get in front of the board after all of this, where the company's growing, I feel pretty good about myself. I can afford to buy a server now. You know, the board decides that they're going to promote me to being a COO. So I'm a CIO. I got the normal weights on my shoulders of being a CIO. Next thing you know, they say, listen, we're gonna give you the stores. So this is a board that allowed the CIO into the board. And then they said, we're gonna let you run our stores. So all of a sudden I've got 3,000 people that report to me. I've got a corporate jet. I'm flying all over the place. And all of these things, that I'd never been a better technologist, because I knew what the IT team needed, and I knew what the business also needed. And suddenly I was able to actually talk to the board in ways that were effective. And we literally saved that company multiple times from a technology perspective, mainly because I had this clarity of having the board, having my peers, as well as having IT, sort of building that strength. And I was kind of in the middle of it. So, you know, getting into the boardroom, no one's really ready for it, because especially from a technology perspective, everything that you've learned as a technologist doesn't work in the board.
Right.
If you think they're going to, you know, be leaning forward in their seats, waiting for you to tell them the answer, you're wrong. So, I mean, I was like a chew toy. I mean, it was so bad. So I would walk into the meeting, and when I started giving my one slide I got, they would, so I knew I lost the conversation when they started calling me Spock. So they'd be like, oh, you're just being Spock. Yeah. You're just, you know, how many stores you're just trying to spend money. So what I learned was I had to learn it, not just a new grammar, but I had to learn that it was a different culture than I was completely used to. I was there. I did get used as a chew toy because I deserved it. I wasn't ready for it. In the end, I was ready for it, and I could say things to the board, and they would actually listen to me. And part of it was you know, my bigger role, but more than that, you know, I realized what it takes, what a company's really run on, and it isn't just you coming in and turning the volume to 11, or thinking that because you know, have your CISSP, because you've bled for that company. You really have. If you're in IT, you bleed for your company. You work hard, and you stay up late. You do crazy things like leave your family at church and things like that, personally speaking. And so my biggest accomplishment was getting to the point where I was able to actually effectively communicate with my own company. And it was almost like perfect pitch. It was almost like a perfect pitch. Mm-hmm. We weren't perfect. We sold the company in the end. I told you about that. It didn't work because of the culture. But my single biggest accomplishment was being able to effectively communicate to a company, inside of that company, in a way that drove us. I'm not saying I was the reason, but we took that company from the brink of disaster to, you know, we sold it for $1.8 billion. It's a public company. So yeah, it was an amazing journey. My biggest technical accomplishment has little to do with technology. It has to do with the wielding of technology and the usage of technology. I mean, these guys put a technology guy in charge of stores. I mean, who does that? And
That's a,
we were
that's a,
hugely successful, hugely successful.
that's an awesome accomplishment as well, because I know with retail, I did a pen test for a huge global retailer out in California, and the amount of point of sales machines and just servers in general that were just horrid.
It's a
And
hostile environment. It's so hostile. Oh my God.
100%. And when they have to go and dictate, tell the board, this is what we have, and this is what's going on. This is what the security test showed, and it's never a good conversation for them.
No.
And even in oil and gas, when I was in oil and gas, my CISO used to dread talks with the board all the time. He would come to me and say, "Give me something positive that I can hand to the board." So I would look and try to come up with something that was moving the right direction, or that overshadowed a failure. But I sat him down. I told him, I was like, "Look, I know we need to report good things to the board, but we also need to talk about the things that we've struggled with and we've accomplished through that struggle. Be real about it." And I think that's one thing that a lot of companies don't do internally and externally. They're not real about their communication.
Yeah.
People want to hear those failures and how they got through those times, because it serves as a lesson to somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the culture is way different in the board. So I'm on the board of 2 companies in Europe. And when they first asked me to be a board member, I was shocked, first of all, because I thought, here's a guy that, I've helped build SOCs, and I've led red teams, and I've been a director of security, but I'm not a board member. I've never had that function.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
then I realized that, it was strange. But then I realized that it wasn't really what I've done that they wanted me to be a part of. It's the way that I thought and the way that I looked forward. And I think a lot of boards, some of the boards that I've dealt with in the past, I think lacked that vision. They weren't looking forward. They were looking at right now.
Yeah.
What are we doing right now? Show me metrics. And if the metrics were bad, then everything was bad. But they weren't looking forward to some of those things that had bad metrics was a progression, and it wasn't a sprint. It was more of a marathon.
Yeah.
But to communicate that to a board, that's where the real skill lies, I think.
Yeah. It's not, it's not a like a circus act. You don't have to get up on a ladder with a bullhorn or anything. It's not that. You can try that and it won't work. And you can try to, puff up your chest and think, like, oh, because I'm Mike Jones, you're going to listen to me. But it doesn't really work that way. It really doesn't. And it's, I think, been on, and the one thing I think about the most from a board perspective was my very first board that I was on. It was completely changed my career. It made me understand that don't assume. And if you go in with this critical, well, we're not secure because you didn't give me any money, they're gonna call you Spock and kick you out.
Oh yeah, and anytime you talk money in front of a board too, unless you've got some diehard facts and a positive outcome for requesting the money, it's going to fall on deaf ears pretty quick.
Yeah. Look, these companies, like I said before, for a company to grow, which by definition, if it's not growing, it's dying. And so for a company to grow, you have to have a certain amount of optimism. And that's what I love about these startups. I mean, I went from having, a lot of responsibility to just being in the startup world and loving it, because everyone is excited and everyone is pulling and everyone's optimistic. And a board, it has to be that way. And I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. Certainly, you were talking about, give me something positive to say. I can distinctly remember feeling like a sellout the first time I went into a board meeting and said to myself, well, I gotta be positive, because if I'm not positive, they're not going to have me on the board and they're going to throw me out, and I'm not even going to be a CIO. I'm going to be, working at Radio Shack or something at the time. And I remember thinking, it's not about being positive. It's about being part of and feeling that the same pain as everyone else, or not really pain. That, yeah, we've definitely got some challenges, and we're going to do the best we can here. And I think one thing I did that was important, and I think I see a lot of this today, and I'm always sort of amazed, as you said earlier, that the same thing still goes on, is that, if you've talked to more tech environments or tech conferences or tech events than you have your own internal company, then you're part of the problem. If you're not giving your company as many talks, as many presentations, as many things about cybersecurity, but yet you're out at RSA, or you're out at Black Hat, or you're at DEF CON, you're part of the problem, man. You need to get back to your company. You need to give your company, a 2-to-1 ratio. Technologists talking to technologists is integral. It's so important. But if you're doing that and you're not talking to non-technologists, then you're part of the problem, man, because they are. And if you help them, then you're not helping yourself.
100%, 100%.
Yeah. I used to do that. I used to feel like, well, if I get an opportunity to talk at RSA, I've made it. I mean, I'm somebody. I've made it. But you should be talking to your board. You should be talking to your CFO, your CEO. You should be talking. I remember I sit with my CEO, and we used to have these conversations, and he would close his door because these are things that he thought he should know. And he asked me, he said, well, how does this internet thing work? And I was like, wow. And so we got all little yellow stickies out, and we had a whole wall full of stickies. In the end, we took them down. See what I mean? That conversation with he and I, all of a sudden, I was part of his inner circle, just because I didn't go out and say, this guy's such an idiot. He didn't know how the internet worked. Right. Instead, I was like, yeah, this is cool. He now knew how the internet worked. Good, maybe for me, maybe good for the company. Those conversations are important. And if you're not having them with your CEO, but you are going out and you're giving the demonstrations and you're doing all these things in these different tech conferences, you need to get home. You need to go home. You need to take care of your own shop, because everything you take care of could take care of the whole industry, something you find. So
exactly. And one of the things I did when I got to Blue Bastion, I think it was my second or third week that I was there, I actually gave a lunchtime talk on how hackers exfiltrate data through DNS. And these are some very green, SOC analysts that, that hadn't had the best training. And, they've gone through a couple of leaders and just didn't have that person that wanted to help really teach them.
Yeah.
And the training program was just not there. And to me, a lot of people probably would have looked at it as a challenge, but to me, it was more of a blessing, because I got to start with a brand new, fresh group of people who were hungry. And one of my first promotions was I took a level 1 up to a level 2 and 2 interns the full time, because they were so hungry. They wanted that information.
Yeah.
And
they may have left there and gone and saved a whole company, a country,
exactly,
a hospital. Exactly. It's so amazing. And that transference of knowledge is incredibly important. And if it's just technologists talking to technologists, one half of that equation is missing. And it's without that other half, we will never succeed.
And that's kind of why I wanted to do the podcast too, because we have all of these great leaders and we have all these people who help build what we know today as the industry. But how much history, how much, written down tribal knowledge do we have? And, where are these good conversations between some of these leaders that, people generations from now can pull up and be, hey, look, this is what they were talking about back then. Why are we still doing this?
I know.
So to me, this was, at first it was just an idea, and now it's more like a history project for me, because I wanted to build something to leave behind, to bring people like you on to talk about your history and your knowledge and your experience, so that, maybe a generation or even now someone can pick this up and go, oh, hey, that's pretty cool. Maybe I might try looking at that differently now.
Yeah. Before we came on, I wrote myself a couple notes. I was thinking, well, what do I want? What do I want to leave here? And what I really wanted to leave is if somebody watches this and then goes back to their company and, does something differently instead of just talking to the technologist, but instead sits down and talks to their CFO. I would love for someone who sees this to say, hey, I want to go talk to my CEO and say, hey, do you know what DNS is? I mean, it sounds complicated, but and do you know what it does? It changes one thing and the butterfly effect, and you never know what's going to happen. So I'm with you, man. I wanted to do this. I wanted to talk to you, a brilliant thinker, and think about, what we can do differently. Certainly what we're doing today, which is we're just not transferring that knowledge as much as we should. The Kaseya, today it's a little bit more open, maybe. I don't know if that's, well, I don't know. I'm such I'm an iconoclast, but more than that, I'm such a suspicious guy. And so I hear it and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if that's really right. But I guarantee you, I walk away from it and I go to my own shop and I'm like, hey, can we look at do we have anything that's old? Tell me everything we have that's old. This is right after the Kaseya, the Kaseya, I don't know why, because it just really struck me watching their CEO give his mea culpa. Did you watch that?
I didn't watch that, but I heard the stories from it. It was actually pretty sad.
Yeah. So but at the same time, from their struggles, I went back and I said, listen, let's look at our legacy stuff and let's decide what we do and don't want. Just because it's legacy doesn't mean it's necessarily bad or it's gonna not live up to some sort of standard, but let's at least look at it. And I can tell you, because of Kaseya, there were a couple pieces of technology that we had to walk away from, not because it was directly related to Kaseya at all in any way, shape, or form, but we really needed to look at kind of what practices and what levels of code they were using. I mean, if you have an application that's using like a language that's not supported anymore, you should be using that. You shouldn't be using that product. And so it'll get you. I mean, so yeah, even from that, I didn't get anything from what he said. He did a fantastic job, like Academy Award winning apology, man. He covered all the bases. And I watched it and thought to myself, man, what would I do? I mean, how would I? It was so well polished. I'm liable to just say, look, we did our best and, we got unlucky or something, but this guy was very thorough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, again, we're kind of touching on the same subjects, but more than anything else is learning from other people's things. And Brian Krebs, of all things, I'm constantly finding things from Brian. And I'm like I send him little emails and things like that. And it's not, I don't think Brian would call himself a technologist, but he'll write something every once in a while. And I'll think, oh man, I need to go find out what the heck that is. And B, if we're doing that or if we're part of that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, along the same lines of Kaseya and stuff like that, doing incident response has really helped me. I hadn't done a whole lot of incident response until this year. And what I found the most interesting and kind of the most alarming is not so much the ransomware itself or the technical details. It's watching the company react to an event like that and what goes to their mind and how the company struggles and just the thought patterns behind the executives and how they address the situation. First of all, it's highly technical. And a lot of the C-levels that were involved don't really know that much about it. They're a little bit more removed. So they didn't have that technical knowledge. And then they're dealing with people who are unseen with vulnerabilities that they don't know. And just watching that pain and seeing how they come out the other end and they come out, knowing more powerful defensive stance, and just it helps build their confidence. But in order to build that confidence, they had to go into something that wasn't within their comfort zone.
Yeah.
They had to struggle. Yeah. Had to struggle, had to feel some pain, had to work under fire. but I think that we all need to do that. You know, not everything in this industry has ever been rainbows and butterflies. I mean,
Yep.
I've worked for more startups than I have big corporations, and there's a reason for that. Because I learn more there. There's more challenges. There's more struggle when it comes to building your service or building your product. But there's also a lot of freedom there too, because you get to build it the way that you want to build it. And I think that after you build that type of environment and you look back and they're being sold, and you look back and you think, I built that. Like that was my work. That to me is fulfilling. I don't know if you get that same feeling like being CEO and board member, but it's an amazing feeling.
I'm a builder, man. I love to build. I love seeing something we've built and seeing a customer use it, or see a lot of customers use it, and think to myself, man, you know, we played a part in that. You know, we did this, or I had this role to play in that, you know. So yeah, when you were talking about, you know, kind of the way companies learn, and sort of this almost violent event of having ransomware. I mean, going through that, you know, for the individual company, it could either be cathartic, or it can be just the opposite of cathartic. You know, fire the CIO and we'll be okay. He did something wrong. She did something wrong. We did something wrong. And, you know, I think I've seen a little bit of both. It's hard, you know, because there's no such thing as an inexpensive event like that.
No.
And B, learning from that, culturally learning from that, not just, you know, reading the paragraph and memorizing a couple words out of it, but culturally changing. I've seen a couple of companies, I'm sure you have too, Mike, where they say to themselves, well, how can we become different? And that, you know, that opportunity exists all the time. But boy, is it hard to get the time to do that. So,
and it takes more than one person. It takes a shift in mindset of many people to make that kind of change, I think.
Yeah, everyone, it's a team sport. If they're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. And no matter what their job is, like I said, I my biggest saves in the industry, and I've had some, I think, big saves, have all been because somebody said something to me. Hey, you know, somebody told me that we do this, or somebody told me that they did that. And, you know, one of the things I used to do with my CISO and his team, and later her team, I used to make them go to our stores. Everybody in our CISO team on the security team had to go to a store, 6 stores a year, and they had to try to take something, or they had to try to put something on a POS, because we had what we call a hot stove rule. And so getting them out and making them literally, these aren't people who necessarily, you know, feel, talking about a comfort zone. They all liked it. A couple of people, you know, got the sheriff called on them and stuff like that. It became kind of a cool thing for them. But they had to go to the stores and they had to like try to take a POS. And you would be shocked. Like each one of them, I think we had 6 people on the team. Each one of them had to go to 6 stores. We had 640 stores. And, you know, they would walk in and say, hey, I'm, you know, Mike from IT. I'm going to grab this server real quick. And I'll bring one back out from my car in just a minute. And they would take the POS out of the cash wrap, take it to the car and take a picture of it and send it to me, of course. You know, look what I got, because I had the stores and I had technology. And so the moral of the story is they would do that, and no one ever lost their job. No manager, nothing like that. It was always like, listen, you guys, you know, make them. We had a 2-factor after this thing where we lost our keys. We had a 2-factor, no matter what, phone call. No one would do anything without calling you back from that point on. And so what they would do, I mean, they would walk in and say, hey, I'm with corporate. I'm going to sit in the back room for a minute, hook into the you know, into the hub and the switch and you know, do whatever they wanted to, or add stuff to the hard drive. We were using Tripwire, and they would add stuff to the hard drive, take things away from the hard drive, and wait for Tripwire to throw a flag and all that. But you know, you can be part of your corporate organization, and you know, regardless of what your role is, without it having to be this horrible event like a ransomware, or Lord help you, somebody really comes in and takes everything, and you don't know it for a year or so. So we used to do a lot of things like that, and having them, like we used to give, time after time, we would have these brown bag lunches where, we would take somebody and say, okay, you're going to talk about containers today. There'd be like, containers? So you want me to talk to containers to a merchant? I'm like, absolutely, I do. They need to understand what a container is. And of course, they didn't retain any of it. I mean, what does a merchant have to do with, using containers for operating systems or something like that?
Right.
But it was just that interaction, and getting to know each other. And so I think that opportunity still exists way, way, way before you've got to start saying words like red team and ransomware and Bitcoin and things like that. You have the opportunities right now. Just get up and go talk to somebody. Go to your CEO and say, hey, I watched this podcast, and this guy was talking about things that maybe you don't know, maybe I don't know. Why don't I have enough money to buy a server? And you tell me and I'll tell you. CEO probably doesn't, shouldn't, especially a modern CEO. And I do distinguish that. And you do too.
Yeah.
A modern CEO should say, yeah, man, sit down. Let's talk.
Yeah.
What do you have? What do you think we should, you may not be able to do it. We may not be able to buy a server this month, but I want you to know, I want to hear you. It can happen, and break down that wall of thinking that because they're the CEO and you're fresh out of getting your CISO, your CISSP. I had to, again, same CEO had to explain to him why we needed a network. He's like, what do we need a network for? He goes, I can get my email now. It's like, listen, we're using Token Ring. And it's like year 2002. I was like, listen, I don't know. We were buying NIC cards from eBay. I mean,
wow.
It was crazy. And, then we had to take the RJ45 and strip out the wires. It was nuts. So anyhow, we went from that to being a multi-billion-dollar company with an amazing network. And, we did that, Mike. We did that through communication, man, not through threats, not through jumping up and down and saying the world's going to come to an end. And if you don't give me more money, if you don't send me to DEF CON, I can't protect you. None of that's true.
And that goes back to the brown bag lunches and stuff like that. So I met Chris at a Bank of America brown bag lunch. He came in as a keynote speaker, and I was just the new guy and was giving a brown bag talk about hacking. And that's how I met Chris.
Wow.
But even talking about like going up to your CEO and just having that communication, even if it's a topic that you know nothing about and you just listen to it. One of the best conversations I had, there was a guy that he was an executive. I didn't really see eye to eye with him, didn't understand him, he carried himself in a different way that I wasn't used to. So I challenged myself. I said, okay, I'm going to get to know this guy. But I'm going to listen to what he talks about the most because that's his passion. And I'm going to go and engage with him on that topic just to let him talk and just engage with him. Because I think a lot of people have a lot of fear of executives too, coming into a new company, and they see those executives as off limits and, let's just fly under the radar so that we're not seen.
Talking about anachronisms and talking about the past. We still have those things. Just amazing. Go ahead. I'm just shocked that people still enforce that or encourage that.
Yeah. So what I did was I was just like, I'm not going to let this guy intimidate me because he intimidated a lot of people just by his presence, I guess. So I went in, sat with him and said, hey, can I have 10 minutes? And he was like, sure, sit down. And I was starting public speaking and I had just given my first talk and I said, I knew he was big into public speaking. I knew that that was his thing and he loved it. Yeah. And so I just went and engaged with him. I was like, tell me things that I should know as someone new doing this. And he went on for like an hour and a half. And before I knew it, it was like 6 p.m. And I'm like, oh, gotta go. It's late.
Because nobody was talking to him. He was sitting there all day thinking, man, I got something to say. But no, he goes home and his wife listens to him or his husband or whatever. But he probably loved that. Probably made his day.
Yeah. So from that point on, it wasn't that, he's walking one way and I'll walk, we're passing, we don't talk. At that point it was like, hey, how are you doing? Is everything good? Do you need anything? So it completely changed the relationship. And I think that more people getting into cybersecurity need to take those risks and
Yeah.
don't look at people as being off limits. Even like people you see on LinkedIn who have 20,000 followers or who are like in the 1% of LinkedIn influencers. Take a risk, reach out to them, and if they don't respond back, then they probably shouldn't be that 1%.
Right.
I take time to respond to everybody who reaches out to me.
Yeah. I agree. And one thing I want to talk about just real quick, we're probably going to run out of time, is one of the things that I'm, as I said, I'm a collector of thoughts and mainly because I'm a builder and everything I build is built on other people, what they've said, what they've done. And I'm amazed how rare it is when an idea is uniquely mine. It's usually something I heard from you, Kim, Chris, somebody said something and I'm like, wow, I can do that. And so one of the things that I'm really, really into today is following the hacker community as a CEO. Forget about the fact that I run a cybersecurity company.
Right.
But right now, is a guy who kind of specializes, as it were, in these unique thinkers. The real unique thoughts coming out of the industry today are coming from the hacker community. And there's still this kind of undertow at times of bitterness and things like I'm misunderstood and all these things like that. But for the most part, if you want to know what's going on, I'm only on Twitter to go out and follow the bug bounty folks. There's some interesting stuff out there from those. I'm on Discord. I watch you. I listen to, LinkedIn is sort of a cool little magnet, right? You can decide what you want to attract. And like you said, what I'll do is I'll through my associations with yourself or whomever else, I'll start following their followings and all of that. And next thing you know, I've got a whole community that I've built around a subject that really, really matters. And LinkedIn is perfect for that. I've got, I don't know how many people I've linked to, but I kind of go from one thing to the next thing, sometimes to other things. But right now in this industry, the deep thinkers are the folks that are coming out of the hacker community. And I don't know exactly why, but I think it needs to come from somewhere. And I think that, maybe you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, we tend to think out of the box in general. The way that I explain the word hacker to kids in school and people who aren't tech is that you're given a book when you learn how to drive. And in that book, it tells you which way to go, what signs to look at. Everything is laid out for you and it's very strict. But there's always going to be that one person who wants to test the boundaries, drive a little bit faster, merge too quick. And sometimes they get in accidents and sometimes they get to where they're going a lot quicker. But we're usually the ones who think differently and look at things and look at the world a little bit differently. So my analogy for networks, and this has helped me since I was a little kid, was my family was in medical, right? At one point I wanted to be medical, but it just didn't go that way. So I look at networks just like I look at human anatomy, the heart, the brain, the vessels being the Ethernet connections, and everything makes sense that way to me.
Yeah.
But again, that's thinking differently than the standard. And I think the reason why that we tend to come up with the new ideas is because we're always looking at the new technology and new ways to compromise things. And so we're constantly learning. And the more innovation that the industry has as far as technology, the more education it gives us and more ways to give back, I think.
Yeah. I'm on your Discord a lot. No, I should say a lot. I kind of put Discord off to the side and I watch it every once in a while. You've got a guy, I think his name's McChicken or something, McChicken. I'm always shocked what he puts out there. I mean, like he'll put out, I don't know if you know who this is, but he'll put all these things, or he or she, I keep saying he, but whoever they are.
Yeah.
And I'm always finding things like, oh, I need to go figure out what the heck that is. But there's nowhere else to go find. There's nowhere else to have that dialogue, as it were. And so that I think anyone who is in the cybersecurity business, and certainly regardless of me being in the cybersecurity business, I've got a company to protect. And you're constantly learning, and you should be out there trying to constantly find the information. You're not going to find it reading a trade magazine.
Yeah.
You're just not. I mean, we've all written articles for some of these magazines. I don't want to say who they are. I'd love to write one for you. I told Kim that someday I will, but
absolutely.
But it's all, once it gets through editing and everything, it's just so washed down, and it's so many few words, and all the parts where you were like really, really thumping the Bible and really bringing the fire and brimstone, they cut out. So you go to Discord and you go look at this McChicken folk guy, and I don't know why. He just seems to stands out because he's always posting things that he finds or she finds, whoever it is. And yeah, I think the community is to be coveted. And I think it's interesting that it's just sort of now emerging. I know I've gone through a bunch of your podcasts just to see who's who, but it seems like everyone's kind of coming, not out of the shadows, but they're not afraid to have a podcast and say, yeah, I did some stuff. I don't do it anymore, but I know what it's like to feel that way. And I think it's a hugely valuable asset to the businesses, as well as the technology, as well as the cybersecurity. So,
absolutely. The more exposure and the more that we can communicate on the same level, I think that is where the benefit is going to come from. No longer people putting themselves in places that are isolated. Like C-levels are now talking to, on the podcast and Discord, we have C-levels, we have CEOs, we have owners, we have people in finance all over the place, and they're all talking to each other on the same level. And I think that's what it takes. It takes that talking without barriers, that communication without barriers, to really get somewhere. And I think the more that we can do that, even though it's a grassroots type movement, the more that we can do that across the industry, the better off things will be.
Yeah. Yeah. You do have a little level of anonymity when you're out, and you can kind of lurk around and see what people are saying, and then go off and look yourself, which is sometimes more comfortable than saying something like, I don't have any idea what DNS is,
Right.
You have that opportunity, and all that information's out there. It just takes just a little bit of effort. And I think being a leader today, it's required. You have to. I mean, this technology, I think we're at not the golden age, but I think technology today is more exciting than it's ever been before. The cloud, MSPs have come out, they're doing amazing things, so everyone doesn't have to have their own IT shop. All of those things are just amazing. And the communications, and the technology is so dense and so
everywhere.
It's everywhere, man. It's everywhere. So if you're not making an effort, you're like, you remember when you first started out of college, and all these gray-haired folks, you're like, oh my God, they don't even know what we're talking about. They don't even know what, all they're thinking about punch cards. It's insane. It's insanity. We have PCs. Today, there's like a whole new generation who should know better, but they're sitting there saying, well, I don't know what a cloud is. I don't know how clouds work. What do you mean cloud security? What do you mean, external attack surfaces? Well, you better know. You better know, because if you don't find out, if you don't make the effort, you're doomed. Man.
And there's a lot of people coming into the industry that do exactly that. And I talk about on most of my podcasts that I always get that one question, how do I do this? And I'm like, have you looked it up? Have you researched it? Well, no. I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me. And I'm like, dude, back when I learned how to hack, and when I got into technology, there was no Google. There was no, I can put anything in and all the answers come out. For me, that was a magic 8-ball. That was the closest we got to something that gave answers, So I always tell them, go back, research. If you still have questions after you've done what you feel like is enough research, then we'll talk. But you have a plethora of information. You have a whole world full of culmination of servers and documents that you can sift through that has everything.
Yeah, it might not be as nice and tidy as Wikipedia or something like that, but it's out there, and there's some cool dialogue going on. There's some interesting information you can find with just a little bit of effort.
Oh yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
Well, I appreciate you being on the show, Gary. It's been a pleasure. Love having you on, and love having you as part of the group. And I hope you continue to lurk in Discord, because we've made some changes, some cultural changes within the haunted hacker community, and really pushing forward some new stuff. So it should be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm totally honored that I'm part of this family. I told myself, if I get through this, I don't seem like a complete idiot, they'll actually publish this thing, and I'll be forever. I'll be part of the haunted hacker family, no matter what.
Absolutely. And that's the cool thing about this podcast is every guest that I bring on, it's a new friendship for me.
Yeah, right.
And I publish everything. And what people don't understand is there is no real editing that goes on with these shows. It gets put out just as it happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of it. We can have real conversations about real things, and nothing is doctored and it's thrown right back up.
So. Yeah. I've watched a bunch of yours, and I kept thinking to myself, well, how do I, like the last guy you had, Kevin Johnson or something like that.
Kevin Thomas. Yeah.
Kevin Thomas. He was like talking about fire and brimstone. He was standing up. He was looking at the camera. He was like, I thought he was getting ready to jump on top of his monitor and grab it and start shaking it around. I was like, dude, he was absolutely, he was so intense. I watched it. I kept backing it up thinking, is he got the camera like holding it in front of his face? It was awesome, man. It was.
Yeah. He's pretty vibrant and very intense, and really wants to see things change.
Yeah. And when I was watching it, I was kind of thinking that that's probably one of the reasons I started with this whole conversation about, being able to talk in a way that's effective. And it's not the diction of your voice. It's inflection of your voice. I mean, it's taking the time and being part of it and giving it a little bit of time. And if you think you can turn the volume above 10 to 11 to 12 and it'll get what you want, it won't. You failed. If you're, one of the things I used to say to myself is, if I'm explaining, I'm losing. And especially at the boardroom. And so finding ways to be effective wasn't just about being a good public speaker or, how I dressed or anything like that. It was being contextually correct and finding, it's like telling a joke. If you don't do it with the right tempo, it falls, no matter how funny it is. So
exactly.
All right.
Well, I appreciate it, and we'll go ahead and get this put up on the web so that the rest of the world can take a look at Gary Mary and our conversation. And I look forward to having you on the next time.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Kim, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Take care now. All right, bye.